Welcome to another episode of the Business of AI podcast, and I'm delighted to be welcoming Sophia Fannon-Howell to the episode today. So, Sophia, welcome.
Thanks, Tim. It's really great to be here today.
Yeah, well, it's. I'm looking forward to finding out more about what you're doing and some of the key challenges you're facing in your sector. But I wonder whether we could just start off by learning a bit more about you. Could you tell us a bit about your background and how you ended up doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background, I joined the energy industry straight after university. I've actually got a doctorate in geology. So energy was kind of a natural way to sort of get into a career. But when I actually first joined oil and gas companies back in the day, the oil price was actually really low, and they weren't recruiting for geologists. So they said, "So maybe you'd like to help us out with our data." And back in those days, we had the big Unix systems. This is going back quite a while. And then, data, especially in the sort of the upstream oil and gas is awkward and needed lots of people to sort of look after it, manage it, massage that data. And so that's how I got started. So I've spent my entire career in sort of data management, and then in digital, working in the energy sector and delivering data and analytics products. And then in the last 4 years, I've actually been working more in the sort of commodity trading, in innovation. And so that's where I've sort of got to really deliver AI solutions to help corporates make money. And now I'm at this sort of point in my career where I'm pivoting, and I want to apply my skills and experience to make a real positive social impact in the UK. And that's why I've created Aterra, and I'm here today.
Fantastic. Well, that's really interesting to hear that sort of journey through sort of data science, as it were, and kind of data and sort of how you've ended up doing what you're doing today. Could you tell us a bit about what Aterra is, why you decided to go into that particular area as well?
Yeah, so I mean, through all my my career, I've seen how large corporates sort of apply technology and data, and now obviously AI, to really sort of capture value from complex supply chains. And over the last couple of years, I've started to get a bit interested in, what are the problems in the UK today, and what are the underlying causes to some of those problems. Food and farming underpins pretty much everything, a bit like energy. So, energy and food underpin our entire economies. And when you sort of dig into why we have challenges like food poverty, for example, in the UK, you start to uncover, actually, we've got some real systemic problems here. And farmers are really struggling to turn a profit today. And you start to look at all of those problems, and there's a serious unbalance. And I'm at that point where I think technology could really help to be an enabler to make a difference. So really, I've created Aterra really to help develop technology to build a much fairer food system, and help support, making it more environmentally regenerative and like I say, just fundamentally fair.
Yeah. That's a really interesting challenge. And I love the way that you're actually sort of trying to address that social challenge by using technology. And you're talking around the food system being structurally broken. And I think that, that's some of us, I don't get out into the countryside that much, but when I do, I'm kind of conscious that farmers are doing an incredible job out there. And we've all watched Clarkson's Farm, I imagine, we've seen the hard work they do. One of the things that becomes very apparent in that is that they get a very tiny share of the value, with a lot of the value going in that sort of supply chain. You talk about an imbalance as well. So how can AI and technology more broadly help to rebalance that imbalance in power?
Yeah, so like you say, the food system is really sort of structurally broken, unfortunately, and it's facing multiple crises. I mean, we know climate change is a big one, and like you mentioned, Clarkson's Farm, you can see a lot of what the farmers have to deal with. really erratic weather, and all the problems that come with that. But yeah, farmers today, they create a huge amount of value for our economy, but actually they capture very little of it. In some cases, it can be as little as 1% of retail prices.
Wow.
And so really, yeah, it's really challenging for them. And so many farmers are really struggling to make a profit at all. In fact, many farmers actually lose money, which obviously is not sustainable at all. And then, that has a knock-on effect to our food system as a whole, because we become more reliant on, food coming from elsewhere. And of course, we're also very aware of what's going on around the globe, and we are part of that global supply chain. So I think there's a number of things in here, but one of them is we need to make our food system much more sustainable and reduce that sort of reliance on the global supply chain. Today the food system sort of optimizes cheapness over and quantity over quality, and this just continues to drive that sort of intensification. Farmers are trying to get more out of, the land just to try and turn a profit. And of course, that then has a huge knock-on effect to the environment and biodiversity. And it's a massive, massive challenge. And cheap food, the junk food is easier to get hold of today than sort of really high quality, nutritious food. And of course, then that just leads to public health. There's some really scary statistics, actually. They think that, that our unhealthy diets driven by this food system, which tries to prioritise cheapness, it costs the UK about £268 billion a year in healthcare costs. And so when you look at that sort of the total cost of it all, actually, it's not cheap. Food is not cheap, but the system is set up in such a way that, most of the supply chain above the farmers are the ones that are capturing most of the profit from what they produce. And it is really difficult for a lot of farmers. So really the supply chain as it is today is extractive. You've got the big agribusinesses, you've got the big retailers, and they're using technology to just get more profit out of the system, whereas farmers are the ones who are creating all the value, they're creating all the produce. So it's a massive challenge, and actually it's sort of there's a real digital imbalance. So sort of to your question, so how can AI help? Well, I think AI is being used by the big corporates to make more money, to optimize supply chain, to understand supply and demand, etc. So really, it's being used for market intelligence. And if it's applied in a way to help farmers, so giving them some sort of AI empowered, I would say, tools or insights, then you start to give them the intelligence, and they can use it for things like benchmarking, so they can understand, well, how much are people being paid? You can use it to help them get to access markets. And cut out some of those middlemen who are taking some of that profit out of the system. So really, AI can help to shift that power to the farmers, to the people who are creating the value, and help to address some of that digital imbalance that we see today.
Really interesting. So you're giving farmers the tools to be able to understand these complex market dynamics, which previously only the big agribusinesses would be able to afford to get their hands on. So could you talk us through a little bit what some of those tools look like, and sort of how farmers are using them?
Well, we're still at a very early stage, but I think you can look at AI as the intelligent layer, really, that sits on top of farmer-owned data foundation. And I think that's what's going to drive the change. AI on its own doesn't solve the problem, but it can help drive that collection of a sort of a data foundation. And it's that sort of collective data foundation, bringing all the data together from different farms. That's really where you get a lot of the value and the power from this. So you can sit AI on the top of that, and it makes the data useful and it makes it actionable. And just a couple of examples on how this could, how you can think about this. So, AI could be used to, like I say, allow farmers to compare how much they're paying for certain inputs in that, things they have to buy to make their farm work, for example. They could collectively pool their data to understand yields. They could use AI to look at contracts. Today, I think the system, farmers aren't in a position of strong negotiation. They don't have a strong negotiating position. But if you think about it, if you kind of knew and that you had anonymous benchmarking on contracts, then you could start to understand how it gives you more power. It allows you to understand what the going rate is almost. You can use AI in that sort of capacity. Other ways, AI can be used to help farmers measure their environmental impact, and sort of connecting what they're doing on the land to maybe grants. There's funding out there, government funding. It can help them quickly understand what grants are available, or potentially even what markets they could access. And I think that the ability for it to connect farmers to that supply and demand, I think this is a huge area, really. For example, today I think a lot of farmers, they just don't necessarily have the time, or the sort of the technical, I guess the technology to be able to easily see what the supply and demand is. And AI can help to coordinate supply and demand in real time. There's a couple of things is worth mentioning. So for today, we've got millions of people in food poverty, and yet we're generating huge amounts of food. You've got a real supply and demand isn't necessarily linked up today. And you can imagine a future where actually it is, and where you've got more supply, you can then find the demand across the country and sort of redirect food to where it's needed. And I think that, that would start to address some of the challenges, especially where you've got instances where too many crops are produced and they're just ploughed back into the soil. I mean, that's hugely wasteful. So if you can apply AI in a way that sort of helps farmers, reduces waste, can better manage that supply and demand and direct food to where it's needed, that would avoid a huge amount of wastage in the supply chain. And then I guess lastly, with the advent of generative AI, I think this is a real game changer because it enables, folk who aren't necessarily digitally savvy to interact with their data in a much easier way. And I think this is a really key moment, I think, and it makes AI and it makes sort of, like I say, getting insights from your data so much easier.
Mm. Wow. Well, there's some great use cases there of how you're using a very powerful technology, different aspects of AI, from the generative AI to the sort of the data modeling, to be able to really sort of empower farmers. I wanted to understand a little bit about how this is actually sort of empowering those farmers as well, because a lot of them are small family businesses dotted around the country. There's lots of them. So is your sort of plan that you're sort of almost creating a sort of a cooperative or some sort of farmer-owned sort of body? How's it going to work to empower them?
Well, it's a very good question. Technology is a very powerful enabler, and I think over the last 10 years, we've seen how AI coupled with data platforms can start to disrupt markets and really change how we live. Really, I mean, a really good example is Uber. That they have a data platform which uses machine learning to connect drivers with customers. So again, supply and demand, and pricing. They manage pricing in real time. And this has fundamentally changed how we live. It's changed our mobility. It's changed how we get about. Before that, we booked taxis in a very different way. It drove a lot of convenience to us as customers. The flip side to that, of course, is now we're at the point where Uber has disproportionate control over the price of taxi rides and of course driver earnings, and we see that at rush hour obviously prices are a lot higher. So I think technology can sort of swing the power too far, I think, in some cases. And so I think that the key thing is how it's governed. And if you can build out a data commons and it's cooperatively owned, the farmers own their own data. They have control over who sees their data, who uses their data. Potentially, they could monetize their data. And, today you've got there are many big corporates who are sort of taking farmers' data and just using it. They're not paying for the use of it. So this is a bit of a fundamental shift. You can start to move the power back towards the farmers. And you can help them to generate new revenue streams from that data, which they just don't have today. And really that governance structure is the key to it, because otherwise platforms become extractive. Like Uber's a very good example of that. But a cooperative model could distribute that ownership among members, and you could have the farmers benefiting, from the use of their data. It's very attractive. You had all of that data. You could think you can start to build more of an ecosystem, if you like. I think it's having a cooperative structure, and then also, of course, giving farmers data sovereignty. They must own their data. And I think that is the fundamental shift that this would bring.
Yeah, well, I love that concept. I think it's really important to have that data sovereignty. And it's something which has been talked about for probably a decade or so, but we really haven't had the foundational technology to be able to deliver it, or rather, the technology has been emerging, but it hasn't been connected up. So, I think you've got things like distributed ledger technology, so the blockchain that underpins a lot of the cryptocurrencies, which is very, very powerful technology that could be used for some of that data to sit upon. But then you haven't had the platforms and the ease of being able to create the platforms, the ability to analyze all of that data to then put it onto a DLT. But now with the emergence of some of these more powerful models, you can do all of that. So do you feel almost like those sort of component parts are now coming together, and that now is the moment? And what are the key shifts that you've seen in the last year or so?
That's a really good point. And yeah, I think we're at a point where all that technology is now available, so it could be. I think the time is right to do this. I mean, actually, in the last couple of weeks, there was an announcement that DEFRA, which is the Department of Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs, they are running a sort of a program with some other collaborators, including the Open Data Institute, the ODI, to start to create a data sharing infrastructure. But this specifically for environmental data. So again, trying to get that ability to see the impact of food on the environment and its provenance. So there's some really great stuff that's going on at the moment, and I really think that the time is right. I don't want to think, I'm not necessarily leading with some of those sort of blockchain and those kind of technologies, because I think just even applying bringing data together, modeling it in the right way, making it available in the right way, and using AI in a sort of a really practical way, I think that could make a huge difference. Just simply enabling some of the things that we take for granted when you work in a corporate environment. Some of that can have a huge impact, even without sort of going the whole way of implementing all the technologies that are available today. But I think, just a thought on this one. I think you see a lot of funding being made available for AI and things like precision weeding, and all of this sort of really, it sounds really great, but is it really solving the problem? And I'm not sure it is. I think it's almost just layering on top of a whole stack of issues. You're trying to get more out of the land rather than actually, why don't we just step back? Why don't we use AI just in a really practical way to make it easier for farmers to do their day job, to do their reporting, to understand the value of the products, and to be able just to share what they're doing. I mean, that can go a hell of a long way in my view.
Well, no, I think you're right, because it's the difference between the platform and then the specific use cases and the data which will sit on that platform. And there are a myriad, as you say, of different ways in which researchers, companies, governments, agencies are using AI-powered tools to do all sorts of things within the food ecosystem, as you've mentioned, from everything from the soil to seasonal adaptations to all of the sort of other myriad of ways they could be used within agriculture, which I must admit I don't really know that sector. But I'd imagine that actually what the difference is that they're all quite fragmented, and this is something we see across many different sectors. Whereas what you're building here is a platform where you're actually building it from the bottom up with the farmers. And so as long as you get that sort of critical mass of farmers and onto your platform, then all those other use cases and those other data sources can fit into and integrate with your platform. So I suppose it comes back to that question about how are you going to get the farmers on board? I mean, because that feels like a critical, important step.
It is. And it is the biggest challenge, to be brutally honest, because, farmers, their job is farming, right? And if you've ever tried to build any sort of digital product, AI or otherwise, you need to have the people who are going to use it involved in the creation of that product. You might have a use case, but if the person who's going to use it isn't involved, then it's not going to work, and they're likely not going to use it. It won't get the adoption you want. So actually, getting farmers on board is the biggest challenge, because you're asking for their time. So it's definitely a case of you have to start really small. So an example, working in big companies, right? You want to build out a data foundation. You know how valuable it is if you're a data person. But the end user is going to say, well, that's great, but what does it do for me? And really, it's that AI-enabled layer that enables them to get those insights. So it's those small tools, starting small, maybe connecting up something simple like it makes it easier for them to get the grants. They don't have to go looking for them. The tool can be scanning and suggesting based on your farm and its size and how it's all, how your fields are structured. These are the things you could think about. There's grants that are available for hedgerow planting, for example. It could come back and make their lives an awful lot easier. So I think it's all about identifying small use cases that could deliver value straight away. And then that's how you start to sort of hook people in. But yes, it is the biggest challenge, identifying farmers who are interested enough, understand the potential, I think, and are willing to give it a go. But it is the biggest challenge, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I think that sounds like a smart approach, though, having that sort of that broad set of services you can help them with. So bringing them in for the things you mentioned there, kind of the grants, etc. But what also struck me as you've been talking is that we're talking around the UK opportunity here, but there's millions of farmers all across the world, particularly in the global south. And I wondered whether that's something which you're looking at to enable those farmers as well.
I'm really focusing on the UK at the moment. I think there's lots of initiatives, that are going on in other places around the world, and I think from my understanding, I'm not a farmer, as you can tell, I come from a tech background. But what I understand, each country is slightly different. Whilst I think there are systemic problems that are global, I think there are, countries and localities will have their own challenge and their own way of doing things. I think in the UK, we have a lot more intensive agriculture that potentially there are in, say, countries in some African countries, which you may have farmers who are much smaller holdings. They have, similar challenges, accessing markets, getting fair price for their crops. But I think some of the sort of tech, I guess, I think is slightly different. So I'm just really focusing on the UK food system. Obviously, I know the UK very well. I understand the technology that's available. I understand, how it can be applied in a practical way. So that's why I'm focusing on the UK. But we can take learnings from it. From other countries. There's great stuff going on in other countries where they're doing things like this, pulling farmer data together, creating more of a collective commons, and then enabling insights, applying technologies such as AI. So we can certainly learn from those.
Yeah, well, I think you've got your work cut out just for the UK itself, right? Because there's so much there to do. But as we start to kind of wrap things up now, I just wanted to kind of ask you to look ahead and over the next 5, maybe 10 years even. I know that feels like a long time in technology, but what might that sort of AI-enabled food system actually look like? And you can give us a glimpse into the future of sort of agriculture and food production.
Well, yes, and to your point, everything is changing so quickly that you don't know week to week what how the future is going to look like, especially technology-enabled future. But I think if AI is applied in this sort of for social benefit, because ultimately this is what it's about. This is what I'm trying to help move forward. If it's applied in this way to empower farmers, drive more profit, then actually you start to move the needle on a number of things. How food is grown. Regenerative farming becomes the economic default because the system starts to reward quality, nature friendly in the way you approach farming. People pay for that. And if you'll start to shift the needle. So regenerative farming, nature friendly farming becomes the default. You get less of the intensive farming. Farmers are rewarded for good practices, improving soil health, improving biodiversity. And at the moment, the current system forces 85% of livestock into intensive systems. So this using AI to drive change and to drive profit back to the bottom of that food system, you start to move the needle on all those things. How food is traded, you can use AI to, like I say, give farmers more visibility of supply and demand, which will help drive local food systems. You can reduce your carbon just in doing that because you're distributing food more easily locally and potentially regionally across the UK. The UK spends about 5 billion a year in food procurement, for hospitals, schools, etc. That's a huge amount of money that could be redirected if you could bring all of that, all of the supply together. And instead of the way it's done today, where it's all very fragmented, that's a huge amount of money that farmers could tap into, which they can't do today. I think AI will also allow us to have real-time data sharing across the supply chain. It can help. It would help. It would ensure everyone has access to nutritious food, and enables different sorts of markets. And then I think very powerfully, it will help governments design policy far better. It will enable the UK government to actually see the true insights from good data, collective data. And today that's very difficult for them to do. So you'll have better, more joined up policies rather than food, the environment, health, farming all being very siloed. All of that could be pulled together. So you start to make decisions based on that whole system because they're all connected. Public health is related to the food. This is it. I guess the broader vision in 10 years, I'd love it if we end up with a food system that, like I say, rewards quality over quantity, keeps money in local communities, and aligns sort of economic incentives with environmental and health goals. I think that is the food system of the future.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for giving us that kind of vision. You sort of made me think around the engagement from the government as well, because you were talking around that. I think it's fascinating to see, and I'd love to get your perspective on what levels of engagement you're seeing from DEFRA. What we're seeing across most departments is that there is a lot of interest from the top down. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor have said AI is going to be the key to economic growth. All departments that we've been interacting with have been hiring some pretty good people into their teams, coming from tech backgrounds who now actually understand how to implement AI. So all of that is good, and there's definitely investment which has been earmarked for these projects, although timeframes sometimes longer than we'd like. But I guess the challenge that we're seeing sometimes is actually getting stuff started and getting stuff done, number one, but also two, connecting up. And to the point you were making before, a lot of the value happens when you start to connect up the thinking across health and food, etc., across different departments, whereas it often remains very siloed. So I'd love to get your perspective. Firstly, how receptive have you found DEFRA when talking about AI? And then secondly, what do you think is the speed of change?
Well, I think, DEFRA and others have got grants on offer for AI. My challenge back to them is about, well, what sort of AI are you focusing on? I see a lot in innovation. AI and innovation is sort of these very advanced technologies, using sensors to collect data from machines and then being able to be more precise on how you plant things. And again, back to my earlier point, I think that's fantastic. However, it's not really addressing the fundamental problem. So I'd like to see, DEFRA and others think about actually funding AI being applied in this more practical way. So I think it's great we're driving to AI, but I would challenge back to the government: are you actually driving the use of AI in the most valuable way that's going to benefit everybody, as opposed to just going after these sort of I say moonshots is the wrong word, but these very more sort of imaginative applications of AI. There's so many startups out there, but think about how could this be done really practically. I would challenge on that. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the second part of your question.
No, well, it was really just about the kind of the speed of change, how quickly government is actually sort of adopting and getting engaged.
Yeah, I mean, I think, of course, any large body, be it government or be it a corporate, often the change isn't fast enough. So I think I would just encourage the government to think about, like I say, what are you funding? What are you trying to encourage? There's so many, great startups, great minds in the UK. Let's just make sure that we're funding the right things that are going to drive the right outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point you made that combines those two things there, which is around the sort of framing the right business need or the problem. And this is something which, when we're talking to large organizations around their AI adoption, they'll often say that they'll rush to create the AI chatbot because that's the sexy bit. But actually, if you think about what the business needs and what the problems are, then often what comes out of that process is data is foundational. Let's get the data cleaned up. Let's make sure it's all in a good format in the right databases. Those foundational things are really, really important. And if you apply that to what you're saying, it's the same thing, right?
It's
It's
exactly
basically,
the same thing. Yes.
yeah. And so getting the fundamental platform right is more important longer term than trying to get all the, I know what you mean by the moonshots, but those kind of more innovative ideas, which are still important for the UK, but they're important in a different way. So I think, I totally get what you're saying there in terms of balancing the importance of the
Yeah.
platform and the data versus the sort of advanced technical and research, which is coming.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, everybody loves a shiny new tool. Politicians love to say, "Oh, look, we built that thing over there. Great." But
Yeah.
yeah, getting the foundations right and actually investing in those foundations make it easier for farmers to farm, to farmers to make more money, and you'll see the systemic change. So yes, absolutely. I think I would just encourage back to the government just to think about what sort of innovation they are funding, and to make sure that they are being inclusive, to just getting the foundations right, get the basics right, and actually put AI into the hands of farmers and of course the local communities. That's practical. That gives them a benefit. Really benefits our society, and I actually think that's almost more exciting in my view.
Yeah. Well, I think what you'll also find is on that local angle. I mean, I love the concept you outlined previously around empowering those local markets. I've often thought, the food that I see in the fields that I drive past, I'd love it if that could be the food that I then get locally and I can buy. And it's very, because of the systems that you outlined before. There's rare that it actually is that connected. So I love that concept. But I know who else will love that local concept, and that's the MPs, because they're constantly thinking around things through that sort of that local constituency lens. So I think there's definitely something to tap into there as well. There's a lot of things we could go on to talk around, but I think we're going to have to sort of draw things to a close. But
I know.
Just as a final word, I wondered whether you could just tell us, how can we find out more about Aterra? Is there a website we can look at to follow your work?
Yes, so I'm still very early. Aterra's only been around for 6 months, so it's super early. But yes, I've got my website Aterra.ai. And also, I've got a paper on the website, which is all about putting farmers first, which really outlines a lot of the challenge and the reason why I've created Aterra. So, please feel free to go and have a look on the website, and also download that paper, and just understand some of the challenges. And, one of the reasons that I've joined UK.ai is because I want to grow that network. I want to share the message, and I'm really excited about collaborating with others who sort of understand this challenge, because it's such an enormous challenge. There's no way that I or even one company, be it a big one, can actually drive systemic change. It's going to require partnerships. It's going to require collaboration, across all the spectrum, right? From farmers, from other tech companies, from the government. So this is a massive challenge. So, I see the collaboration and partnerships that are to be absolutely critical. So I would love to hear from anyone who is interested in this and what I've said today. If it really resonates, please do reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Sophia. And I think across some of the events which we've got coming up, there'll be lots of opportunities to introduce you to some of our other members who are working maybe in different fields or related fields, but have that similar passion for data. And I think that's going to be one of the big opportunities here. So looking forward to making those introductions. But it has been fascinating to talk to you today. Thank you very much for sharing so much of your knowledge about what you've been doing here, and that massive potential for food and for British farmers to really start to use AI powered platforms to be empowered and to compete, but also to sort of really sort of give that long lasting benefits to the environment, and to local people, addressing some of those really structural problems in society. And I'm excited by by hearing how you get on and how this grows. So
Thank
thank you
you.
very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tim. It's been a pleasure.